Sup, y'all? Welcome to episode 5 of Taking Stock with Geoff and Mikey. We brought on a special guest here for this episode, Coach Simon, hanging out with us.
Ew.
And in this episode, we are going to be building the perfect esports game with bits and pieces from other esports titles.
The frickin' game.
Yes, it's alive. So, we have our categories here. Let me pop on over to the sheet. So we broke this down into 8 categories. And for each of these categories, we're going to be assigning a game which we think would make the best aspect, I guess. We're pulling that aspect from the game and bringing it into our Franken game here. And so we're going to be looking at team size, core gameplay, aesthetic, availability, community organization, netcode, in-game customizability and design, and content creation. And I think we could probably, as we talk about these topics individually, expound a little bit on what they mean in case anything is confusing.
Right.
I don't think
In case we are going to argue amongst ourselves what they mean, because
Right.
that's probably going to happen.
Because we did do that a lot yesterday.
Yes.
So, I think how this is going to work is that we're going to go through each of the categories and we're each going to reveal the game that we picked for this. And so we'll go, I guess, just in the order that this is on the sheet. We ready? Shall we begin?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm up first here for team size. And I picked Smash Ultimate for this. And I kind of struggled with this because I really want to use Smash Ultimate for a different category. I think that that category is what makes Smash Ultimate so important and so popular. But I couldn't think of another game where the primary format is singles, but you also have teams formats that you can play. So maybe you guys can help me out with this and make my answer a little bit better, actually, because I really want to use Smash Ultimate somewhere else, but I really like the idea of having your having the ability to play singles, but also teams in the form of doubles and crew battles. And even if the game is a little bit better, you could play 3s or 4s. And having this all while you only need one console to play it is huge for why I think this team size is what the perfect esport needs to be. I think the perfect esport needs to be something that you can play in person on either 1 or 2 consoles and be able to see the entire gameplay at once. And everyone sees the same thing. So it's not a split screen thing and you're not looking at your own monitor. I think that to me is very important because we talked about last week, I'm a huge fan of in-person events. And I think that the perfect esport would have to be something that you can play in person very easily. And I think Smash Ultimate lets you do that in the most ways, if that makes sense. It gives you the most variety in terms of team size for accomplishing that.
Gotcha.
Okay.
That is an interesting and very valid point. Do we want to go? Let's see. What order are we in on the sheet? Oh, actually, it goes in reverse order of when we made stuff. Okay. I will go second then. So I said something different. I obviously, you know, obviously, you know, this team size you could apply to a wide variety of games. And my first thought about it was Splatoon, but because I wanted to use Splatoon someplace else, I made it Halo instead. I think 4v4 is a really good team size for a couple of different reasons. First of all, I think that despite having come up from the Melee community, I think that team games are where it's at for esports for the most part. You look at, first of all, like the most successful ones financially. I'm using esportsearnings.com and just reading down the list here. we've got Dota, team game. Counter-Strike, team game. Fortnite, not a great esport.
Question mark, question mark, yeah.
League of Legends, team game. So then we've got StarCraft 2 at number 5, which is the first game that is played by a single player. PUBG, again, Battle Royale. That one's iffy to me. Overwatch, really, really big team size team game. So I think that it's disproportionately team games up in the upper echelon of the prize money. You know, people are more interested in investing in a team experience. I think that there are some like philosophical, psychological reasons that teams are more compelling than singles play. The fact that people can be really, really cool as individuals is true, but when people come together and cooperate, you know, people with boats and a harpoon can kill a whale. Like that doesn't even make any sense for a single human to try and do. It's insane what humans can do as soon as they start working together. And seeing that put on display, seeing teamwork, I think that's too invaluable not to have in our perfect esports game. Now, Halo has an especial. It has a place that maybe I should be considering it more than I should be considering Splatoon for this, because you can change up the team sizes, you can adjust, you know, to play deathmatch as a solo player. There are a whole bunch of, and it's not perfect by any means, but there are custom games. You know, you can mess things around a lot in that. In your lobbies, you can change all the settings and all of that. And I was actually considering it for the in-game customizability and design place as well. I don't think it has quite the same control features as what I actually ended up putting there, but in terms of getting into a lobby, like Halo was king back in, and I'm talking like Halo CE, back when you could pass it around on a flash drive and just have everyone at the library playing a LAN with you. Like, that was an insanely efficient and good multiplayer experience that you could customize to whatever group of people you had there. So I think that while, you know, the core of the game that is played competitively would have changed a lot through making it a one-person team instead of four, it's not a perfect translation of the gameplay into 1v1s like it would be with Smash and like singles and doubles. I think that Halo is a really good model to follow for competitive play.
Gotcha. I actually like that we have differing perspectives on this. I think I'm kind of going like the route of take something and give it superpowers that it didn't already have. And I think you're kind of going the route of this is a really good format that a lot of people have tried but never really like hit the sweet spot on before. And so like there are ways that you could supplement that to make it better. I don't know who's right. Simon, you're the tie break.
Here I am, and I'm not actually breaking any ties. I'm going for a team size of 5 in games such as Valorant.
Ooh.
I use Valorant because it's similar to a lot of other competitive.
And because you want to be able to use Dota later. Yeah, we get it.
Be able to use Dota later.
Yeah.
But the reason I think 5 is such a great team size is there's something to be said about like the larger a team is, I feel like the more complex it becomes to a certain extent. I think 5 is pushing the limit. But at the same time, I think the number 5 makes it to where, like, as the meta shifts in a game, in an esport, having, like, 5 positions, 5 different roles that, like, are all volatile and moving around makes for a very interesting viewer experience in the sense that following the trends in these changes is enjoyable, right? Like, I like, for instance, in Dota, right, because it's the experience I'm most comfortable with, we went from having tri-lanes. Tri-lanes were one of the most common ways to play Dota competitively, to the now where we run 2-1-2, so 2 in each side lane and 1 in the middle lane. There have been times where it was 1-1-2 and then a roamer, sort of similar to League with their jungler. And because there's 5 positions, each position has a pool of heroes that is most suited to those roles, and it changes a lot every patch that changes. I would also say that games where there aren't roles, like CS:GO, again, Valorant, like the example I used, makes it interesting where map design has to be created with that in mind. So you have to have little ways to flank defenders to make it worth having 5 people who aren't just running down a line at a bomb site or at a objective of some kind. I think that it splits it up nicely to where you always have the one odd man out, and that guy can always be doing something separate from the 2 pairs or all 4 of the others, which tends to be the case. There tends to be the one outlier position or role in any game with a group of 5.
Okay.
Gotcha. I still think you kind of broke the tie in Jeff's favor there.
Yeah,
because you went with teams.
say, like, at the end of the day, I believe having multiple players is better for esports than one.
One thing that I think would be interesting to talk about here is why we chose those and not the alternatives. Because
Oh yeah,
I do think that what Simon said, 5 is maybe pushing it a little. Like, that was my feeling as well. Because I think what we saw with Overwatch is that a 6-player game is just a little bit too difficult to balance competitively. As soon as you can stack like 3 tanks on top of each other in that game, and they're all going to the same place, there's just too much of a possibility that some balanced decision you've made results in them being able to brute force a strategy on someone.
yeah.
Like in a shooter, there's just no way that you take 3 powerful characters that are flung right at your face with a diva shield in front of them, that you're going to be able to handle that in any way.
Right.
MOBAs handle the problem by making it so that the resources that the players need to be strong are split all the way across the map. But if you've got, let's say you were to try and take Melee and make it a 5v5 game, that would be absurd.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
it would just
Doesn't
it
work.
would all just be a matter of isolating one player at a time and absolutely destroying them
Yeah.
without any counterplay, and it would be about the macro game. So
I
the-
decided against single play. Oh, sorry, I didn't know you were gonna keep going on.
yeah, it was just one more quick thing. So like that's kind of my thought with Halo, where it is a game where all of the players have a pretty significant amount of power, but you make the map just big enough, and you make the roles that are available just varied enough by where the weapon drops are. And you could talk about Splatoon, where there's frontline, backline, midline with the weapons you choose. And it's never going to be perfectly symmetrical, which I think is cool. Like, I like how a MOBA doesn't give you 6 players, it gives you 5, so you have to decide which lanes you're going to prioritize. I like how in Splatoon there is frontline, midline, backline, and those are the 3 roles that we think about, but there are 4 players, so which one do you double up? I think that those are cool strategic decisions. I like that asymmetric idea of the number of players, but I also think that if we were to have more of them, it would really start creating balance issues. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say I decided against the. So instead of talking about like why I think it's good to have multiple people, which I think is covered pretty well by Geoff, and it encompasses my position on it. I think that with single player games, you have a very good opportunity for grassroots competition. I think it's by far the best way to facilitate good grassroots competition.
Mhm.
It's the ease of access, like Mike was saying, all of that. I think it does wonders for the scene. But I also feel like at the highest level, it doesn't as easily translate the same way that team games do in terms of marketing, in terms of advertising, all of that. I feel like you get more people involved if you have larger teams. Aside from that, I think that I'm a big proponent of the idea of the metagame, where like you have outside information from the game that plays into the game itself, and I feel like there's just more of that with a team game. Things like popular combinations that they use for characters or strats that they'll use to open up a objective. Things like that, I think, are just much more prevalent in team games. A good example I could give would be like Rainbow Six Siege, where it's super important to play mind games with your the other team, and when you can do that in a 1v1, I feel like there's more layers to it uh, when you have to imagine multiple players working together as opposed to just a single player and their objective, which is to beat you. Um, Now, I think that there's a lot to be said about the height of competition for single player games, because I think that the absolute ceiling of competition for single player games is probably when I say single player, I mean 1v1, is much higher than team games. I think games like StarCraft, again, like fighting games, uh, are extremely high level competitions. But I think that for the viewer experience, as well as for what I consider to be more important in an esport, which is team play, counterplay to another team play, I think that that's much more prevalent in a larger team, 4 or 5. Again, I prefer 5, but
Mm-hmm.
that's my thought process.
I do agree, and even in sports, I think that's true. That it's much easier to root for a team than it is an individual. Like, it takes something pretty extraordinary for an individual to like raise to that status of being part of kind of like the social conversation, which is a great segue into my next item here, which is core gameplay, and that's Melee, baby. Because Melee is really, I think, the kind of epitome of this sort of extraordinary storyline stretching across the ages. We had the era of the five gods, and now we have people challenging the gods, and before that we had, Mewtwo King being the best player in the world, and before that we had Ken and Isaiah, and it's always been the Crimson Blur put it the best when he said, if you give Melee a stage, it will deliver. And I want my esport to be a game that Mango can be good at, because because Mango is the Tiger Woods, Mango is the Roger Federer and the Rafael Nadal, and I want my game to be something where the good players at Melee can still be good players at this game. And that falls under the core gameplay category for me. Absolutely, it has to be Melee. I have to put my money where my mouth is here. I've said it for years now. Melee is the best game to ever exist, and I will defend even its most controversial of sticking points here. I think L canceling is fine. I think that all of the things where people can point at it and say, well, that's not accessible because it's too hard. I would tell you that Melee was actually a very commercially successful game. It was the best-selling game on the GameCube console by a long shot. And, it obviously isn't as popular as Smash Ultimate commercially, but neither was the GameCube wasn't nearly as popular as the Switch either. So I think that Melee, you can't beat it, You can't beat it in terms of depth. It absolutely feels like you're flying when you're playing on a Melee, and I don't think that any other game comes close to it in terms of just how sick it is, how much there is to discover. We're still discovering things after 18 years with this game, and it's not going to stop anytime soon. It has to be Melee for me, despite how hard it can be.
I think that Melee also has a really cool argument against the teams format, in that when you make it a single-player game, there's no... you don't need to have hive mind to make perfect decisions, You usually with role-based team games, you really only have to focus on like one or two things. Like as an AD carry down in the bot lane, I'm focusing on not dying, getting farm, and maybe fighting after my support told me, hey, we're gonna fight.
Yeah.
That's all I really have to worry about. But when you're the only person who's in full control of that character, like, you're making decisions with your subconscious mind so fast that you don't even realize you're making them. half the time. And it does make for a much higher level of play that is on display by every individual player. If you're not familiar with the concept of, I don't want to bring that in. I don't think that applies here. Never mind. Anyway, so Mikey's going to feel a little bit betrayed here because I went a little bit more mercenary on this. I was a Melee player, full disclosure, for, since 2006. I was a huge TO of Melee events, and I didn't actually put Melee here.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's
I put it elsewhere.
There's one of two places I think you could put it.
So we'll get back to that in a second. For core gameplay, I actually put Rocket League, and I put it here for a couple of reasons. First of all, Rocket League is soccer. It is so easy for someone to see and understand, even if they have no bloody idea what's actually going on with the control inputs, who the teams are, or anything. Ball goes in goal, people cheer. That's how soccer works, and that's how Rocket League works. They took the world's game and turned it into the world's video game. And so that aspect is huge. Another aspect of it is that even though it's easy to see what's going on in the macro sense, in the micro, it's incredibly complex. It takes a very, very long amount of time to learn the movement. And I think that the mark of whether a game is truly a beautiful game to me is how fluidly and how much there is nuance to the game's movement more than anything else. If you can't move your character around on the screen in an interesting way, I'm not interested in your game. And in Rocket League, the movement is everything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's literally the mechanic by which you hit the ball. It's the mechanic that divides everybody in terms of their play. And there's really nothing else to the game than the movement. So I think that from a mercenary perspective, in the sense of I want this game to be played by as many people as possible, and like I want this game to be as, deep and complex and well loved as possible, Rocket League is honestly a game that makes a really good argument for itself. So I put that one there.
So I have a question here. You can play 4v4 in Rocket League. It's called Chaos Mode, and nobody does it. Do you want to make Rocket League so that it's like bigger and better for 4 players? Or was there just no other 3v3 game? What's wrong with Rocket League being 3v3 is my question.
Okay, so you're saying if you assemble all of my parts together, that those two pieces conflict. So what's wrong with Rocket League? What's wrong with me saying the team size be 3v3? I was considering the elements independent of one another.
Okay.
If we were to Franken-game these all together, I figured that you're coming in with your ideas and Simon's coming in with his, that we might align on different ones, and that even if we were voting and we took our votes and put them together, that they would probably clash a little bit too. I do think with Rocket League, you could just make the field bigger, and that would have a huge impact. Like, you could even make the goal a little bit bigger, but make the field bigger. And that's how you fix it for Hacksball. Hacksball is 2D Rocket League, and no one can convince me otherwise. It is just as beautiful a game, just with one dimension less, and a lot less movement tech, which is why I didn't put that there. But seriously, all you have to do in that game to go from a 1v1 to a 4v4 and have it be just as competitively viable is change the field size.
So I guess in your game, like if you were to put your game all together, are you saying that this should be like car soccer, or are you saying it should be something as simple as car soccer, where you were just getting objective into like ball into objective?
I definitely think that the big strength is that it imitates soccer, and so that's a pretty big deal about it. Something that is universally recognizable and understandable, as opposed to I'm going to drop from a flying llama and shoot 99 people in a town that I've never seen before. Like,
Yeah.
it takes a little bit more brain power to process what's going on in most of these other games. But in Rocket League, it's just, oh no, yeah, I know what that is.
So so not necessarily car soccer, but something that is
And I mean,
yeah.
there are too many pieces of Rocket League that for me to be able to isolate any one of them, because one of them is the movement tech. One of them is that it takes so long to get used to that and to get nuanced with it. The fact that things are physically flying through the air in this very graceful way, that is a huge part of it. So I definitely think that, if I were to try and Franken-game something, and actually put all of these together, sure, I might have to increase the field size a little bit, but it would probably still look like Rocket League.
Okay, gotcha.
All right. So I know what you're expecting me to say. All right. But I decided to throw everyone for a loop and support StarCraft as the esport with the best core gameplay.
Okay.
I am not surprised, actually. I think that StarCraft deserves to be talked about.
RTS games in general, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
They're so in depth. There's so much you can do in an RTS game. And the one thing that I think RTS games haven't been very good at, and I don't believe it's impossible for them to be good at, is team gameplay. StarCraft has some decent 2v2 matches that I've seen, but for the most part, everyone's in it for the 1v1. It's a thrilling idea to imagine that you're the general of a large army. It's just you making the calls, and you're fighting against the other army, and it's this big battle of wills. But I think that there is more nuance that you could have if you had a little bit more complexity in the individual units, and you had more players behind the wheel. The reason I think that would be interesting is because the way I see it playing out is that there would be roles. There would be one person maybe manages the units that have CC capabilities, or they manage this base, which is producing these units, or whatever they would like to do. And what's interesting is that the roles would become so fluid because of the way an RTS works. Because if all of a sudden there's a big scouting party coming over here, well, now, even though you may be handling the healing units or something like that, now it becomes more important that you flush that scouting party out. So maybe you need to create some more units for yourself. And I think that the level of teamwork that would be needed to control one pool of resources in an RTS, and to do it well, to keep your economy up, I think it would be crazy. I think it'd be super cool. I think there's so much possibilities there. Aside from that, I think the basic idea of larger factions to pick from could be super interesting in a team setting, which is something StarCraft does. You have, the Protoss, the Terran, and the why are they slipping my mind now? The Bug
Zerg.
Boys. The Zerg. The Bug Boys. I played Zerg. I don't know why that was so hard to think of. But I think that there's a reason that StarCraft hung on for so long, and a reason that RTS had such a staying power in the early scene of esports. And I think it's extremely tragic that we don't see more RTS nowadays. I think their genre is so much depth and complexity that they would fit extremely well. If you brought StarCraft back, when I say bring StarCraft back, obviously people still play it, and it's still an esport. But bring it to its height again, and I think it stays. I think people just need to see it again.
Mm-hmm.
I will say that I am glad that we picked 3 hard games.
Yes.
3 technically demanding games.
We could talk about that. We could talk about the difficulty. I think that's definitely a part of core gameplay.
Maybe we should talk about what the positive would be of picking a game that's a little bit less technically demanding. What the positive would be of picking like a Smash Ultimate here, for example.
I could talk about, because I was originally going to pick Heroes of the Storm for core gameplay. I think Heroes of the Storm is a great MOBA.
Interesting.
I think it's super fun. It was one of the biggest collegiate esports for a long time, and there's good reason for it. The issue that it came across was that it just didn't have enough power at the higher level of esports, and it wasn't appealing to that group of people. But man, it was raking in the dollars for I mean, I don't know if you guys know, but the ASU Esports program was created and funded largely due to our Heroes of the Storm team.
Yeah.
They were the ones who got ASU interested in funding our esports program. So the thing about it is that a lot of higher level players, like from other MOBAs, who are interested in trying it out, which is an important aspect of having a new MOBA, is to appeal to those players.
Mm-hmm.
They felt like it was just too simple. There was too little going on complexity wise. The heroes, while they're definitely interesting, their kits are not exactly intuitive sometimes. They're the complexity doesn't last beyond what order do I press my buttons, or can I land these skill shots, or things like that. The hero builds are what really made it interesting, because in Heroes of the Storm you have a choice of 3 talents of sorts at certain level up points. And the main focus of Heroes of the Storm was pushing objective-based gameplay, because every MOBA has objectives, but Heroes of the Storm was objectives. It was 1,000,000% objectives. So what that created was a great scene for colleges. Teams were able to form pretty easily. The game was easily accessible. It created a way where you could train new players on it. And the strategies were super interesting as well. They're mostly about map control, but again, there just wasn't enough depth to appeal to a more competitive audience, which was extremely sad to see.
I think with a game that you want to be taking off as an esport, it needs to be able to surprise someone and impress them enough to inspire them. And I can't think of another way to do that more effectively than to show someone something they had never seen before, didn't think was possible, but completely understand how it fits within the mechanics of the game. What I just described, that is a level of complexity. You need to have a game that can surprise someone, that a high-level player can show you something that is so cool you never would have thought of it. You don't have something so cool you never would have thought of it in Smash Ultimate. Like, it's once you know a few basic mechanics about the game, you've seen everything there is to see. And yes, the game's animators made it very, very cool when you hit a spike, but you've seen spikes before. You've been hit by them in quick play, and there's nothing that you're going to see in at a high level of play that you haven't already seen in quick play. In Melee, I had been playing competitively for years. I went to a tournament, and Sung's Marth down tilted my shield, dashed back, and then pivot F smashed when I dropped the shield to try and punish him for hitting me. And I was like, oh my god, that is the coolest thing I've ever seen. And I learned pivoting over the next 4 months or so, just so that I could do that same thing he did to me. I've never felt that way about Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. I've never felt that way about League of Legends. Like, sure, there's like, oh, so you can like auto attack in between the queues. Okay, that's smart. There are creative ways to use those skills, and like, there's a famous outplay that Faker did in a Zed Ditto where and was it a Zed Ditto? Why was it a Zed Ditto? Because that would have had to have been blind pick. Anyway, there was a famous outplay that he has where I think the reason that it is impressive and cool looking is that I have no bloody idea what's going on, and I think that once I broke it down and actually learned the character, I'd be like, oh yeah, okay, that's kind of predictable based on what this character can do.
Yeah,
I think there's just a lot less potential for other games that are not complex to surprise you, to impress you.
I think that one thing that Melee and Rocket League have in common is that it's very much like a blank canvas. They don't like railroad you into doing certain like combos or types of movement or anything like that. Like, Melee and Rocket League give you the tools and say like, here, go nuts with them. And it creates a really beautiful result in both of those games, I think. I think Rocket League is very similar to Melee in that people are going to be discovering things that you can do in that game given its physics and its movement for a really long time.
Yeah, I would say to defend my case against the blank canvas, because I enjoy a lot of those games as well. But I tend to prefer games with hard set metas. A lot of the games that I play have metas that are strictly defined by the patch notes. My argument for those games is that a blank canvas. So I'm using this argument. It's the same argument that I use against a lot of sandbox MMOs, because I have that argument a lot as well. Where a blank canvas is super nice, like it's super fun to play with, and the level of expression that you get out of it is absolutely insane. And it's obviously that way with Melee. The way I feel about it though is that at the end of the day, in a lot of blank canvas situations, there's an optimal. You know, there's you have a choice. You have an infinite number of choices, but there's always going to be a choice that you should have made instead.
Well,
And so I feel like it's almost an illusion. And now I feel like that kind of crumbles with like movement, right? Because movement in both Smash and Rocket League are infinitely expressive, and it's really hard to define what optimal movement is. And to that I give it away immediately. But my argument for it is that when you have something that's such a blank canvas, I feel like you have to be extremely careful about patching the game. I feel like you have to be very careful about updating the game.
You don't do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas with I think it's much more important for an esport to evolve over time and to have new things. I think one of the reasons that League of Legends and Dota both thrive so well is that they're completely different games from when they first came out. They are so new, they're so fresh for people, and you could play them forever because you know that if you don't like the way the game is now, it's going to change in a couple months. And there's something very appealing about that. There's something appealing about the idea that you can quit Dota and come back and you're playing a new game.
Yeah, I disagree. I can see why someone would want that from a perspective of like a consumer, like you want new content to come back to. But if Melee were remade today, like I would keep wobbling in it. I would change literally nothing about the game.
Yeah, and I think, and like I said, I think that's just a core difference between our philosophies on what makes an esport.
Yeah,
and I'm willing to accept, like I said, that there are complete advantages that a game like Melee would have over a game like Ultimate, which would more define what I'm talking about in terms of being frequently updated and changed.
Yeah.
I think that those were two very important topics, but we've been talking for about 45 minutes now, and
we gotta move on.
We should probably move.
Yeah.
We can make this a 2-part episode, maybe, if we need to. So, aesthetic is really where I wanted to put Smash Ultimate. I think that if you include IP in this category, that's obviously what makes Smash Ultimate like the strongest choice here for me. But I used it already because of the boring category of team size. And so for this, I'm putting Overwatch.
Okay.
I think that seeing Tracer fight Winston would be cool. Not as cool as Mario punching Pac-Man, but still pretty cool. And Overwatch to me is like the first of its... So like Team Fortress 2 did the kind of cartoony shooter thing, but in a world of like barren Call of Duty, Battlefield games, I think Overwatch stands like head and shoulders above the rest in terms of character personality. I mean, Halo has an interesting world, but like, I don't know. Grunts fighting Master Chief is just not quite as appealing of a thought as the Overwatch characters being in this position, and so I got to give it to Overwatch. I think Blizzard did a really good job in terms of designing their characters in that game and the world and everything. So, pretty simple. Overwatch gets it because I can't give it to Smash Ultimate.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
I think those are two very strong arguments, both of which I considered. What I ended up putting down, because I did this one a little bit earlier than I did some others, and so I put down a list of 4 games, really, that I thought fit this mold pretty well for different reasons, and then I ended up eliminating Overwatch for a reason I'll get to in a second. But I called my category reveling in cartoony nonsense. So if the game takes itself very seriously at all, I rule it out. So for instance, any of the the war shooters, they just strike me as fairly jingoistic.
Yeah.
You get a lot of that sort of thing even in a fantasy world like League of Legends, for instance, where Team Demacia is the right, the light, the good, the pure, I think that if you're trying to build an esport, you're trying to focus primarily on the gameplay experience. And what that means is that, first of all, this isn't going to be a very interactive title that will let you do whatever you want as a player. So no matter how finely crafted you make the lore between Soldier 76 and Reaper, at some point, two players are going to pick them on the same team, and the whole concept is just going to evaporate as nonsense. That is, I think, my biggest criticism of Overwatch as a game. It's that the storyline is there, and it absolutely does not matter mechanically, because as an esport, you have to sacrifice everything for the core gameplay. So trying to make lore out of it, this is the reason that people look at League of Legends lore and they're like, there's so much of it, and apparently it's so good. Why don't people know about it? Because it doesn't matter to the gameplay.
Right.
And if you're going to make an esport, everything is secondary to the gameplay. You might as well just make it silly and fun. I think that Fortnite is... I'm going to use Fortnite later, but I want to talk about how beautiful an example it is, because none of Fortnite makes any sense. And it's okay with that. It decides, all right, well, let's just throw in some cool dances, and let's throw in some characters people have heard of. Hey, you like Deadpool, kids? Here's Deadpool. Hey, you like John Wick? Here's John Wick. There's Aquaman in the game now. Like
Travis Scott.
Right.
Yeah.
and the reason that almost made me put Fortnite in there as my top aesthetic pick was that they run concerts in game.
Yeah.
And they make this whole beautiful psychedelic light show kind of
it's
concept
pretty
all
cool.
around you. You fly through the music video. It's so cool. And I think that the idea of Fortnite is just like, sure, yeah, there's a shooter under this, but man, this is just a dance party, man. This is all you're coming here for. It's crazy, it's zany, and it's a lot of fun. And I think that really suits it very well. But in the end, I have to give it to Splatoon, because Splatoon focuses on its aesthetic almost as a core gameplay element. Splatoon has the gear system where it changes your in-game loadout to have certain gear, but people focus so hard on looking good while they have the good gear. You'll see pros all the time like, wait, I need this shirt with this patch on it. Someone get this to me now. I need it. Because they don't just want to play the game. They want to look good while they're doing it.
You gotta be fresh.
You do.
Yeah. Besides the obvious that it is a game that involves painting everything, which is, to some degree artistic, I suppose. There's also so much effort that is put into the world building that makes it feel like you're in a bigger community than you are when you go into the game of Splatoon. It's maybe like a quarter the size of the Smash community, if that, maybe an eighth by some estimates I've seen. And yet you go into Inkopolis Plaza and feel like there are Inklings all over the place. You feel like this is a worldwide affair. You feel like everybody's got their own voice here. And it's one of the most diverse populations as well in the game. There is a bit of a storyline that is very arguably an allegory for civil rights. And it's enjoyed by so many different kinds of people. And lastly, the music is just better than the music in any game I've ever seen. It's so varied. They take so many different influences, and they do such a good job at emulating all of those influences. I've just never seen I've seen very, very good video game soundtracks, but I've never seen them on so many different themes and so many different styles than I've seen in Splatoon. So I think that game because it can attract both of the hardest of hardcore players by being very intense, but also be appealing to children, but also be appealing to people who just want a fun game, and people, of all genders, of all ages. I think that is the game that I have to give the aesthetic award to.
Okay. So, I am once again going to surprise everyone with this choice. For aesthetic, I used Dota. This is where I blew Dota. All right.
Interesting.
Now, okay. For those unfamiliar with the aesthetic of Dota, it's very rustic looking. It's very rough. It's very the heroes look like if you met them in a back alley, you would be upset.
Very 15 years ago RTS.
Yes. There is a huge emphasis on making the characters look cool. The models, some of them are kind of outdated by now, but we're slowly getting some updates for those. But the majority of them are extremely well done, high poly models. The sets that you can put on your characters, sort of like skins, but you could do individual items, like you can in Splatoon in Dota. So like you can mix and match your favorite sets, your favorite parts. Some of the sets give unique spell effects. So like you can equip this part, which gives this spell effect, and then this part, which gives this spell effect. So you can mix and match spell effects even. There are sort of like the ultimate skins in League, like Pulsefire Ezreal and stuff like that, in the form of Arcanas, which can change like the basic model of your character. It'll give them a whole new voice line, like new portrait, a whole bunch of other stuff. And so all of the cosmetics, for the most part, are very serious. They're not goofy. They're not pool party. It's very like in universe. Now there are some exceptions to that rule, and the exceptions don't exist in the cosmetics so much as they do things like taunts. In Dota, so the competitive scene in Dota is actually completely facilitating of trash talk mid-game. You can watch the International, the highest level of play in Dota, and you are allowed to use all chat, and you are allowed to taunt your enemies. It's a huge part of the game. The team who won the last TI, OG, their gimmick is that they use chat wheels. Chat wheels are preset phrases that you can make. You can put like weird emotes. You could put sound effects in them, and they would put monkey emotes, or they would make like the like the old funny cartoon, like the falling down sounds and stuff like that, gongs crashing and things like that. And they'd put funny phrases or stuff like that, and they use the chat wheel, and it sends it to all chat. And so the other team, after they mess up, will just be hearing bells ringing and monkeys laughing and kookaburras and like crazy stuff. And so there's this sort of dichotomy that exists where the game looks very serious and very like rugged, and then you have Venomancer, who is a big slug who shoots poison and sets poison wards down, and all of a sudden he summons a banana from the ground and it peels itself. And because people call him Banana Mancer because he looks like a banana. Like that sort of dichotomy for me really is enjoyable for an audience, as well as I feel like it appeals to both sides, right? Because even though the core aesthetic of the game is very serious, I think that really helps a lot of people who struggle with the cartoon aesthetic get into the game. But then the people who are more about the goofy, the sort of funny stuff like that, they also get to express themselves and express that goofy behavior, and it's not frowned upon. Again, at the highest level of play, you can watch clips from the International. They use chat wheel. There are clips of in like the post international documentary where teams are getting so frustrated by this chat wheel that they mute all of the enemy team, and it's just funny. Like it's just funny. I think that the aesthetic for Dota is just absolutely amazing on that front. I think that the serious look of a game helps people identify more with the characters. And as far as like lore and stuff goes, because we briefly talked about that with other things, the lore in Dota is extremely deep. Actually, there's people who like make whole videos on lore in Dota and who focus almost purely on the lore aspects of it as opposed to the gameplay. And and there's that for other people as well, you know, if that's what you're into. The characters talk to each other mid-game. You could unlock voice lines for the characters. But just the ambience of Dota, I feel like fits very well for esports.
Interesting. All right, do we want to move on now?
I think we can move on.
I think that's an
I think
interesting
those were
perspective.
Those were three very interesting and very different answers.
Yeah, for sure. Availability, I went with Fortnite. I think that there are drawbacks to this, especially when you're talking about a fighting game. I think that there's always, when you're having your game available on multiple platforms, going to be an argument about which platform is best to play it on. I guess which control scheme is best to play it with. I think this requires a little bit of your suspension of how you think about Fortnite, and that, like, I think this game, you need to be able to play it with a controller as well as you play it with a keyboard. And I think that kind of just goes with the fighting game archetype here. Also, I want to point out that before this point, I kind of just made Smash, but with Overwatch characters. So, like, kind of worse. But I think this is where it really starts to change, because I think that despite all the negatives that you might be able to bring up with having something be free to play with, like, paid DLC, nothing beats the accessibility of being able to pick this up on whatever device you have and play it, like, in somewhat of a legitimate way. Like, obviously, playing a fighting game on mobile is not going to be good, and I think everyone will realize that. But, like, being able to play this game on the Switch, on the Xbox, the PS4, and the PC with, like, cross-platform play and, a pretty consistent experience, I think that outweighs all of the negatives that could come about with having paid DLC for characters or having slight differences in console in terms of who has an advantage. So, Fortnite for me, easy pick here just because you can play it on anything.
Okay.
I have something that is possibly going to be controversial on here. I put League of Legends. Now, League of Legends is not playable on console. It is, I think there's some kind of mobile app for it, but you definitely are not going to be playing it on mobile. And the reason that I put it here is because, granted, I've been playing Nintendo consoles my entire life. I think consoles are a scam. I think that everybody in America has some kind of access to a computing device. That's almost true. Like, a majority of people for sure have some access to probably a computer, but maybe it's just a smartphone. But I would say, if people could, they would probably have a computer, because it's useful for more than just gaming. It's going to be more powerful than the typical game console will be. The Xbox was literally just take a weaker operating system that you can actually fit in a box that size and ship it as a product. It's just, a console is a computer with maybe some kind of unique controller attached to it, and that's all that it is. And the thing is, yes, you can create a motion controller, you can do something innovative and make it proprietary like Nintendo does, but you could make that exact thing work on a computer if you really wanted to. And I think that it's really kind of silly to expect someone to buy some completely different computing device just for the purpose of being able to play those exclusive games, because you can do everything else on a computer. The second reason is that the computer has the controller with the most inputs that you can possibly map to it. You cannot possibly play Dota on a controller. You can't convince me otherwise. Right. Yeah. There are too many keys that you have to hit. I have a lot of trouble trying to play.
Real quick, Boxbox has played League of Legends at a decent level with the PS4 controller, and it is hilarious, and I recommend you all watch it. Okay, that was all.
Yeah, okay. That sounds like playing Dark Souls on a Guitar Hero controller, and I will absolutely be watching it. Anyway, so I think this arises out of my attempts to play Fortnite on console, because at every step I'm reminded that this game is going to be easier to play on a PC. If I have the hotkeys to be able to set builds and edits to just a single keystroke, instead of having to move my control stick, move my aim, do certain things to edit stuff out, I'm playing so much better on a keyboard. And I feel almost a little bit betrayed in the idea that the gameplay translates over to a console when everyone who is going to play competitively is going to do so on PC. I would rather that the game be honest about, here is the best control scheme that we can possibly give you, and we're going to give you that one. And we're going to make sure that everyone who plays is on a level playing field and is going to have all those same advantages. And that platform is going to be the PC, because I don't think anything else actually really makes sense if we stop to think about it.
Yeah. I agree with most of that, yeah.
And I guess the argument could be made that even in a fighting game, like, you would rather... If people had the expectation that, like, the box was how you played Melee, like, I think that people would probably play the box over a GameCube controller.
Mm-hmm.
Which, maybe the solution to that is that it has to be played on controller. Like, you have to have an analog stick in order to play it. That's how I think Melee controller legality should be. I think it should be required to have an analog stick for you to be able to play the game with it. But that's a good point. I think the keyboard is, like, or at least box type controller, something that has a lot of buttons that you can map to various things, is always going to be the optimal way to play a game.
And I think the mouse is an important part of that as well.
Right. Well, yeah. But, like, even... I'm talking about, like, obviously for a game where you need to, like, aim or, like, move with, like... Like, you wouldn't play a fighting game with the mouse, I don't think. I think it's too imprecise for to be moving with the mouse for a fighting game, but, like, you know...
Yeah, like, in fighting... When I learned fighting games, I learned how to play Street Fighter 4 on a keyboard.
Yeah. But, like, even in a game like a fighting game, which is the least extreme example of this, playing on a keyboard or playing on a controller with a lot of buttons is going to be better.
Yeah, there was something. So I forget who was talking about it. I think it might have been Daigo as he was switching to hitbox. He said something like playing stick is nice, but there's something to be said about the consistency of being able to type out your combos.
Yeah.
Which I think is true. Once you understand the timing, it's impossible to miss input on something like a keyboard. You know? You just, again, type it out. But sort of moving on in my direction here, I'm going to say availability will be that of CSGO. Low price point, consistent price point across time, available on the good old PC. So, a big reason for that is I'm not completely against consoles in terms of esports, because I think that as long as everyone is limited to a certain controller, or a certain control scheme at the very least, then the game's even. It changes. So, like, the way that you would build on a controller in Fortnite, for instance, is different than a way you would build on a PC, but if everyone had to build the same way that you would on a controller, then I think it would be fine.
Yeah.
You know, you would just adapt to that different, that play style of building. But I choose PC because I think PC is configurable with the most options. I think that, you know, there's no like console wars, like, oh, I want to play this game competitively because I got to get an Xbox, you know. It's very open. The level of community I think that you can have on a PC game is somewhat larger and at least easier than the kind that you would have playing on console, just due to the fact that, you know, you have stuff like you could have Discord open, you could have, you know, your voice chats open, as opposed to having to go through the whole process of adding people, getting a group up, you know. Whenever I want to play a new fighting game, I just join the Discord for that fighting game, you know, because I play everything on PC, including fighting games. You know, if your game for some reason wants to have a controller, most controllers are compatible with basic drivers on PC. You know, like we play Melee on PC. I think that, if we play Melee on PC, we could probably play a lot of other games on PC as well.
Yeah.
I use my fight stick on my computer, for fighting games. So aside from input scheme, I think it's just the most bare bones simple platform. I guess not simple, but like the most bare bones platform that you can have, which is very appealing to me, and I think that it just makes sense. The larger reason I picked CS:GO was because of the idea of just a low stable price point for a video game, and you have it forever. I think that it does a couple of things. One, it stops Smurfs from being as prevalent, which is a huge problem with a lot of online competitive games. Is that what's to stop a player who's really, really good from just creating multiple accounts just to ruin other people's game, But if there's a price point, like at CS:GO, it's not big, it's not a large price point, but it's enough to where people can't just do that, Like, and if you do, like, whatever, you want to pay, $15, $20 to do that, whatever, fine. It also helps make bans a little bit more scary because you have to rebuy the game. You can't just launch it up again on another account and try again. Obviously, bans don't work. Tyler 1 proved that point very well. You don't just have however many accounts, something like, how many accounts was it by the end? Like 20 something? Like, it was a lot. It was at least close to 20. And eventually they had to ban his IP. They had to, like, specifically ban his IP. You can't do that. You can't do that for everyone, I think if you just make there a little bit of a road bump in that whole scheme, it takes a lot of will from people to care about going out of their way to do this stuff. But that was my main point for something like CS:GO.
I do want to keep things moving along, but there was one point that I wanted to make based on what Simon said, because I did actually consider CS:GO pretty carefully. And there were a couple of reasons, and they're different in nature, I think, than the reasons you gave. But there are reasons that I chose League of Legends over it. One of them was that it was free. I think that free means that, because, if there's even any cost associated with it whatsoever, there's a commitment that someone has to make to actually go and get it, which definitely that makes it such that someone who's going to join it is going to not smurf or, treat it flippantly. But the plus side of that is that there are just so many more people who are playing because League of Legends is free. There's no money that you have to put down for it, And because of that, the other reason is that, Valve they've got Steam. And Steam, for one thing, it's one extra step that a person has to take to go and get a game. They have to have the Steam clients, and there's a little bit extra that they have to do and understand to get on. And, League is literally, there is a website, you download League of Legends, that's it. There's nothing else that is complicated about it. Everything that you need is in that file.
Yeah.
And I think that incredibly, incredibly low barrier to entry is so important for getting more people into the game.
I would argue, though, that, like, the whole having to download its own launcher type of thing is I feel like it's worse when you're doing it for just one game. Like, I feel much more comfortable downloading games off Steam now that I already have it and it's just like a universal platform, as opposed to, like, okay, well, now I gotta go download this on this website and get this launcher to launch just this one game. Like, whenever I find games on sale for GOG, even then, and I use GOG, like, it's like, oh, I guess I gotta have another game on GOG, it's I feel like it's just a hassle. But when you have like a universal platform, something like Steam or even something like Windows Store, something like that, I feel like it's just easier. Because
part of it is also just that Valve scares me. Full disclosure, like
yeah, no problem with that. I understand that, but like, I mean, to be fair, Tencent kind of owns League of Legends, so I mean,
yeah, that's also true.
Yikes.
But yeah, I definitely get what you mean. Where it's just like, oh well, how do I play this game? It's like, okay, well, first you got to go to Steam, you got to download Steam, then you got to make an account for Steam, then you got to. I definitely get that, that mindset of it.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to unless Mikey had something to say there.
No, I think that.
All right.
I'm sticking with my guns on Fortnite. Okay,
the community organization is a topic that we had a lot of debate over what it actually meant. I think it was this and like in-game customizability that we were all
Yeah.
in different headspaces about. So I'm really curious how this is going to go.
I kind of just use the definition, like, how does the developer interact with the competitive community? How do they support it? How do they not support it? And for this one, I use Street Fighter V. And I think that, yeah, my answers are going to be different from a lot of your guys's just because of the fact that I centered around the idea of being able to do both in-person and online competition. And I picked the fighting game archetype, so my answers are going to be a lot different. But Street Fighter V, in my opinion, has this kind of... There are problems with having your community be run primarily by a company and having that company make business decisions instead of decisions that are right for the community. And so I think I have a feeling where Geoff put Melee. And we could talk about the merits of why you might want your developer to be even more hands-off than Capcom is with Street Fighter. But to me, the superpower of having this circuit that is developer-funded, developer-sanctioned, is a big advantage for a community like this. And I think it's kind of in this middle zone where they're leaving small tournaments alone. They're not having like strict requirements for you to be able to play this game at a LAN or anything. Like you can go down to the gaming zone, and just play Street Fighter on a Sunday, and Capcom doesn't touch that at all. And I think that's good. But there are also like this expansive list of, and I say expansive, I mean like 15 like Capcom Pro Tour events per year, which I think is a really good number, and they're spread out, throughout the world. So I think that the way that they handle their competitive community gives it kind of that edge where if Smash had this sort of thing, it would like really pop as an esport. So Street Fighter V is the pick for me here.
So yeah, Mikey was correct. I actually put down Super Smash Bros. Melee. Now there is a significant amount of disillusionment and sadness that goes into me putting this down here, because the greatest thing that Nintendo ever did for Super Smash Bros. Melee was release a terrible sequel to it. Absolutely god-awful. We all hated it. It stripped away everything that was beautiful about Melee and only added, there are three things I think that were good about Brawl. One was the soundtrack and the ability to customize it. One of them was Subspace Emissary, which was a really cool single-player mode that I would have loved to play with Melee physics. And one of them was Smashville. Those are the only three things that I think were good about Brawl. And, the rest of the competitive community largely agreed with me on that. The rest of it was a slow, floaty mess that, competitively speaking, was significantly less balanced. And, the top tiers didn't really have weaknesses like they did in Melee. There were so many problems with it. And because of that, people stuck to Melee instead. It was bad enough that people didn't want to play the sequel, and they stuck to the old version of it. And that's the reason people still play Melee to this day. It's that, it's a beautiful game. Absolutely, and there's so many beautiful games that have died because sequels were released. And I think the most damning thing about Street Fighter is that exact thing happened. Street Fighter 4 was a really good game that people stopped playing when Street Fighter 5 came out, even though people had a lot of complaints with the way that Street Fighter 5 worked, because they had developer support. Now, there are good ways to handle developer support, I think. In terms of building gigantic tournaments that the whole world can see, I think you look at Riot Games, and even on a smaller scale, something like CSGO or Dota, Valve's support has been very interesting and very varied across those games. CSGO is kind of Wild West. Thorin, who is a top player, claims that Valve's involvement in CSGO is a lot less because it doesn't have such a direct competitor as Dota does, which is an interesting thought. But I look at the way that they handle both Dota and CSGO. And a lot of people like the CSGO model in that it kind of feels like the tennis Grand Slam. It feels like there are going to be maybe 4 majors in a given year, and all of them are about equally as important. And, you know, when I think back to the times that I think have been most successful for Melee, I think it has kind of felt like that. There's been kind of Evo, Genesis, Big House, and something else that really, really mattered that year. And all of them mattered about
Apex.
equally. Sure, yeah. And all of them mattered about equally. And that was so cool about that scene, that you could talk about the biggest tournament of the year 4 times a year, and they all mattered about as much. And that gives you better data for deciding who's actually better. I think in a competitive community, that's what you're really aiming for. And the problem with Valve's treatment of Dota and Riot's treatment of League of Legends is that there is one big international tournament, the International or League of Legends Worlds. And it's only that one that we are meant to care about that much. That's not how a competitive game works, though. A competitive game shifts, you know, in terms of who's best and who's not every 2 weeks. You know, you give someone 2 weeks and they can get better than the best in the world if they were already on his heels. Things fluctuate a lot, and sure, some people have dominant streaks for a while, and if you run multiple tournaments in a row, that'll prove that. But I think that we put too much emphasis on one tournament. There are a lot of negative things that happen. One, the results are skewed, you know, based on whoever won that one tournament that one year. That's the one that matters. That's the one that gets the funding. There are a lot of really good players who don't get the recognition they deserve for that. And with recognition in their field often comes their livelihood. But second of all, it also really devalues smaller tournament organizers. There's no chance, I think, for any tournament organizer to ever be recognized in the way that Juggle Guy is in the Smash community if we just had one big international that was run by Nintendo. Juggle Guy is a legendary tournament organizer who runs the Big House, and it has become, you know, one of the de facto majors in the Smash community, even though, you know, it's not run by some tremendously big organization from the outset. It's not an Evo. It's not something with the same old school grassroots legacy that Genesis had. You know, it didn't really start in the old days. It didn't really start that small. But because Juggle Guy was just such a good TO, he was able to make it big. So I think that, honestly, I have yet to see a case where I am convinced that a big company is going to successfully manage tournaments to the extent that they are competitor focused and fun for us to both view and participate in, as much as a community that just had no developer support to begin with and did everything by themselves.
What do you think that, like, Capcom is too involved then with the Street Fighter scene?
I think the problem is just that there is an expectation on the player's side that they will move on to the next game. I think that every player of a video game they love should be willing to play the game that they want to play instead of the game that is current.
Okay.
Because the developer states it.
That ties up your argument a lot. Yeah. Because I was slightly confused on where you're going with it, but that definitely solidifies where your argument is for me. So I do agree with a lot of what you said. But again, I'm more focused, as we've determined in previous conversations, on the higher end of competition, on the viewer experience, on, you know, stuff like that, because I feel like games, as long as you, like, so with fighting games, I think it's a little bit different because there's kind of an expectation that you'll come out with another, you know. But with games like StarCraft, games with like League, like Dota, you know, there's not really that expectation of like we're gonna have to move on eventually because this game will not be supported by the developer. So with something like that, I see no reason to really worry about developer involvement, because as long as they're not overreaching boundaries and shutting down local tournaments or trying to have a say in community run projects, I don't really see an issue with allowing a developer to have something that's big and sanctioned and has a giant prize pool and you know, big venue, stuff like that. So before I get into the exact answer, I wanted to talk a little bit about what Legends do for esports, right? a very popular tale is that of Ice Frog in Dota. You mentioned before why Dota might be getting more involvement than something like CS:GO, and I am here to tell you that the reason is Ice Frog. Ice Frog is a completely anonymous person, has never been identified since he started working on Dota. And he is like a lead designer in Dota. He is basically like the guy who does development in Dota. So the reason why Valve supports Dota 2 is because they don't. It's Ice Frog. It's 1,000,000% Ice Frog. The community loves Ice Frog. They don't even know him, but they love him. And this sort of idea of this involvement, right, where Ice Frog is a huge part of the community in a sense that he is the one who people associate with patch notes. When you look at the patch notes, you see Ice Frog. There's a common phrase, "Thanks, Ice Frog," you know, or "Ice Frog, please," you know, because like you associate that with that developer. And in creating a character of sorts by being this completely anonymous person since Dota 2 started. In fact, even before that, he was working on the original Dota. And nobody, except for his coworkers, except for a very choice few people who are community pillars, know who he is. And that's why I chose Tekken for community organization. It's very similar to it's very similar, I think, to Street Fighter V with the Capcom, Pro Tour. Yeah, they do a very similar thing. That was one reason for me picking them. But a big reason why I chose Tekken over something like Street Fighter V is because Harada is a character. Right now, he's kind of being a weird character. Okay, I'll admit that. I don't know if you guys have seen his tweets recently, but he is being a little bit weird about this whole rollback netcode thing. However, there's something to be said about how excited people get at EVO when Harada walks onto that stage.
Right.
And he competes in his own game. He joins pools. And he plays, and his games are on stream, and it's hilarious, you know? And I feel like that kind of enjoyment, that kind of fulfillment is something that is interesting, because it shows you, it's like an olive branch, you know? It's this idea that I respect the community enough to be a part of the community. And something like that, I think, is super important in a game where you're talking about the highest level of competition. Again, as long as it doesn't tread on the toes of those who are trying to create grassroots tournaments, because I feel like those, again, are so important, especially for something like fighting games, things like MOBAs, collegiate leagues, even just state leagues, stuff like that. I feel like they're so important for the development of an esport. And so I feel like it comes with a caveat that it has to be very passive in terms of dealing with those kinds of things. I don't even think they should offer to help out with those kinds of things unless they're explicitly asked.
All right, I've added another category also, which is the legend category, and so I have Mango, and Simon has Harada.
I have Harada.
Jeff, who's your legend?
But you gotta add Ice Frog, so it's Harada and Ice Frog.
Okay.
I got it. I love Ice Frog, dude. I don't even know him. But yeah.
Jeff, you gotta pick a legend now.
Oh, also,
as a side note,
Ice Frog learned Chinese because a big part of the Dota 2 player base is from China.
What a legend.
So he could go on forums and talk directly to the audience.
Jeff's thinking very hard about this.
I can't think of a better one than Armada.
A paragon of excellence.
God, I could tell us all the story of Genesis 1 and how beautiful that tournament was. And I mean, this is Mango and Armada are both very closely entwined in that story, and I could just as easily say Mango for the same exact reason. But, well, are we discussing that one right now?
I think it's just a quick note and done. You know, I don't think we gotta go too in depth with it.
Because I mean, I could say Faker. You know, I could say someone who is for a very long time the best League of Legends player in the world and had all the star power and all the trappings and felt like a rock star. it was really cool that people knew Faker as well as they did. But for me personally, like, I love the crap out of Armada. I think that everything that man does is something that we should all look up to. So, let's move on to netcode, because usually we'd be finishing the podcast at this point, and we've already committed to going more than halfway. So let's go.
All right.
It's them
Luckily,
fighting
these
herds.
last parts. Oh yeah. I don't even think we need to talk about it. I don't even think we need to talk about it. Really.
Anything that uses, I mean, and it's easy for me because I'm using a fighting game also as an archetype, but anything that uses GGPO, it has like this sliding scale where you could put a certain level of delay where you can have it be input delay, and then if it gets laggier than that, it goes into rollback netcode, and I think that functionality and that customization is really nice. Easy.
The one thing that I wanted to say here was that I had to specifically give a shout out to Mortal Kombat 11, because there's a great Ars Technica article, by the way, about rollback netcode, that it features Mortal Kombat pretty significantly as a part of its discussion of this, because rollback netcode is something you really have to have planned starting off when you're designing a game. It's not something you can just, let's tack that on at the end. Every part of the game's systems have to be built around rollback netcode for it to really do what it has to do. It has to be taking a snapshot of every single system of the game at every point in time so that it can construct what it rolls back to. So Mortal Kombat didn't start that way. And they decided that it was important enough for them to have rollback netcode in their game that they were going to reverse engineer, figure out how to get rollback netcode into the game they had already started creating. And it probably added another 2 years to the creation of the game. And they still went through with it. And I am so happy that they were rewarded with being one of the few games that EVO actually featured. Because, the other games, like, I love the developers of Skullgirls and, them's fighting herds. Those people are amazing and very dedicated to their scenes and everything. But they didn't have to struggle as hard to get rollback netcode into their game. They were planning on it from the beginning. But with Mortal Kombat, those developers just slaved over it for a lot longer than they would have had to make sure that we had that experience. And I think they deserve to be mentioned for that reason.
All right.
Absolutely.
So, for me, if I was going to a fighting game, obviously I'd go rollback netcode. I was originally going to say Skullgirls, but then I thought about it, and after I switched my core gameplay to StarCraft, right, I realized that rollback netcode wouldn't really work well for an RTS.
Yeah.
So I decided instead for my netcode to be based on Warcraft 3. Something where it is peer-to-peer. Now, peer-to-peer with 5 people on a team each, going to be a bit rough. It's going to be a bit difficult to work out. But I think that as long as we either have dedicated servers, which Warcraft 3 had at one point, or like a solid peer-to-peer connection, I think we're golden. I think that, honestly, peer-to-peer is one of the best ways to do a lot of online games that aren't fighting games, where, like, a difference of a frame or two could be such a huge deal.
Right.
I think it's much more about how smooth the game plays. I was tempted to also put TF2 because of the dedicated servers and the peer-to-peer options that you have. You could also just host your own server. You could do, LAN connections, stuff like that. But the same thing's available on Warcraft 3, and it more closely models what is needed for a RTS.
Gotcha.
So. Yeah, I think it's good that we got a non-fighting game example in there.
Right, I agree, yeah. So in-game customizability and design, this was another kind of contested definition that we had here. I went with Rocket League here. Rocket League, and the thing that I was thinking about in particular with Rocket League is your ability to create these sort of custom training, I don't know, you want to call them mini games, they call them like training packs or something. But, like, there is so much work put in by the community to working with kind of like this canvas that Rocket League gave them. Again, going with the idea of, like, letting the community play with, like, the tools that the developer gives you. So anyone in the game can create like their own customized training mini game that essentially, puts them in whatever situation in the game that they want to be put into. Rocket League also doesn't shut down like mods of the game. So there are mods like Boxes Mod, which can give you a lot more information about matchmaking. They can, there's just so much room for customizability here that I think kind of emulates sort of the Melee modding community in a way. And this is kind of my way of also sneaking that community mindset into this design with a game that actually lets you do that in a way that's like sanctioned by the developers. There are a ton of ways that you can use Rocket League to get better. In a way that, if you're trying to do this with Smash Ultimate, you kind of just have to watch a video, Rocket League lets you do it. Rocket League is for the tactile learner, It lets you be hands-on. They also have, like, a decent tournament system in-game. It is unfortunate that it's single elimination, and, like, there are some things that are just... Like, if the server disconnects, like, it's lost forever, and you have to restart the tournament all over again. And this happened to us while we were running a Rocket League tournament. But it's cool that it's so easy to be a spectator in the game. If you're playing a private match, you just sit in there while 6 other people are playing the game, and it's very easy. If you're playing in a tournament, you can just basically click on a tournament match, and it will bring you into it in real time. It has a really good like director mode for spectators. I think it just offers a lot of functionality here that doesn't really exist in the fighting game community in a way that is as expansive as it does in Rocket League. So that was my choice.
I love that choice because I think that the ability to let your users create tutorials is so damn powerful, and no company is really going to know when they release their game exactly how it's going to be played competitively. So letting people do that is such a great tool, and I love Rocket League for that answer. I think that there is no single game that I thought was, this is the paragon, this is the best. They all have their trade-offs. With Rocket League, it's the tournament system, because I think that it's so easy. You just put in a few lines of code, and it's a little bit more complicated than that. But you can easily build a double elimination tournament if you can build a single elimination tournament.
Absolutely.
It's not that hard. You could build Swiss in that if you wanted to. You could build round robins into that. You could make this into an in-game challenge, and I would love to see a tournament actually, or a game actually do that. So I think, like, my caveat here at first, I cleaned this up, but at first I said, well, they all suck, but I guess Dota. And my current answer is all have significant untapped potential, but I guess Dota. Reason I say Dota here is that, first of all, you can remap everything that you can do to any key on your keyboard that you want, and that is so important for that particular game.
Yeah, that's also something you can do in Rocket League. I forgot to mention that.
But with Rocket League, you have fewer buttons.
That's true. Yeah, well, you can play it. You can play it on keyboard. People don't, but you can.
Oh, true. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough. But so so that was one factor, and another factor was the amount of options available in the spectator mode. I know that Halo has a replay mode that lets you go to any point in 3D space on the map and see basically an entire simulation of the whole game. And League of Legends has this. I imagine Dota has this too, though I haven't experimented with it myself. But Dota, it just gives you more stats. It gives you more of an ability to change what's on the screen at a given point in time. There's an auto spectate cam. There are so many features built into that that the combination of its fantastic spectator mode, which so many games are terrible at.
Yep.
Like even when it has a good spectator mode, League of Legends is difficult to follow visually. I think Dota it's still not easy to follow, but I think there's less what his girlfriend reviews call it, diarrhea Christmas lights. Um, that there's a lot less visual flair that gets in the way of you seeing what's going on, I think. So it's I think it's a better spectator experience. They've given you as many tools as they possibly can in Dota, is the sense that I get, that you've got as much of those settings you can change, as many of those different mod game modes. I think that's one thing that Valve has gotten very good at, is dealing with mods. I think they have a good balance, because you have to acknowledge when you're Dota that your game was originally a mod.
Right.
Um, and so I think their relationship with modders is the most healthy out of any of the big esports that I've seen. Um, Aside from, of course, Rocket League, which we just talked about. I think the combination of control scheme customization, spectator mode, and modding capability is strongest in Dota, but I'm not happy with those three categories with any one game, and I would love to see developers do more for this.
I think this is one area in which there is a lot of untapped potential for a game.
Yeah. For mine, I chose World of Warcraft. Play a lot of World of Warcraft lately. The level of customization that you have with your inputs, your visuals, just the way you play the game is so intense. I play, for the most part, healer. I play a lot of healing in arenas and whatnot. And for instance, you can make macros to make your heals mouse over. So like, instead of having to target my friendlies, I can stay targeted to the enemy, mouse over to one of my friendlies, and press the button that's macroed to use this healing spell on mouse over, and it'll heal them. And I don't change target or anything. Could do the same thing for CC effects, things like that. Now let's say you have an AoE. Usually the way an AoE works is it's like a normal cast in League of Legends or Dota, where you click it, the indicator comes up around your mouse, you place it, you click again. Now the issue that comes up with that in World of Warcraft is that you have a global cooldown. Every button you press sets all of your abilities on a global cooldown. So you want to be going as fast as you can, so that by the next global cooldown, you'll be ready to go. So the main issue that you come across here is that to do it fast, it's pretty hard, because you have to you have to click again, you have to aim it and stuff. But you could set a macro to just cast wherever your mouse is. That you could macro different skills together. If you have a certain combo you want to use, you can do stuff like that. And beyond that, you have access to customize a lot of your UI. You can move frames around. You can make things different sizes. You could hide elements of the UI. Using add-ons, you could change your UI completely. For instance, my UI has all health bars in the middle of the screen, so that I can see them all, because I'm a healer. And it has, like, the enemy cast bar is really close to my screen, so that I can interrupt spell casts and stuff like that. And the reason that I'm so focused on this ability to move UI and customize controls and customize all this and that is because in a game like StarCraft, where it's going to be 5v5, and the goal is to make it an extremely complex RTS game that no person could ever play on their own, you're gonna need stuff like this. You're gonna need to be able to make things, personal, so that you can fit more easily into whatever role you're doing. For instance, one thing that I see being super useful is you can move your skill bars in World of Warcraft to be where, like let's say you have a really important skill and you need to use it on cooldown every single time. You could blow that up to be half the size of your screen and just put it in the middle, and you'll never miss it again. Just things like that, like. The ability to customize so thoroughly is something that would be super needed, and I honestly think it would make it so much more interesting. It adds this sort of blank canvas element that you were talking about in terms of, like, oh, well, what are the pros doing? Like, oh, how can I modify my UI, or how can I modify my macros or add-ons to look more like this? Now, the obvious downside is that certain add-ons would have to be moderated, or would have to be shut down depending on what they actually do, because some add-ons could be giving an unfair advantage, stuff like that. But I think that with a curated add-on system, I think that it could be done really easily. So I'm not too worried about that aspect of it.
Cool.
Right on.
Content creation?
I struggle with this one. I went with The Godfather. Call of Duty. Get your EDM ready. Show me those swooping drone-like footage of the maps, and let's make a montage. I don't know what else to put for this. Maybe you guys have better insight on this than I do, but Call of Duty is my pick.
Yeah, honestly, there's such a strong video editing culture in that community for, in shooters in general. I mean, Halo had a lot of this too, but yeah, that's a strong answer, I think. The one thing, because, God, it's so easy to find stories about creators shutting people down for certain things, and that's copyright law is a whole other conversation that we could have. Like that's a podcast topic in and of itself. But there were so few places where I found content creation actually being encouraged by the developers, and based on some limited information that I wasn't fully satisfied with, I decided I wanted to go with Fortnite for a couple of reasons. One, I think that it's no surprise to me that Ninja got as big as he did based on the game that he was playing.
Sure.
I think that conglomeration of, like I said, reveling in cartoony nonsense and the pop culture that was embedded in it, both in terms of dance moves and in terms of the characters involved. I think all of those things thrown together make that a game that is ripe for content creation.
I didn't even think about the absolute storm of TikTok memes that are based on Fortnite.
Mm-hmm. I think that the game is well designed for it. And one thing that I also found was that Epic Games has a partner program where they, as the game developing studio, will, to some small degree, support content creators once they get above like 1,000 followers or something.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily the highest bar that you have to meet. You don't have to be Ninja to get their attention. Now it's modest, and there are probably good arguments to be made based on research that I didn't have time to do. That maybe there are other measures that developers have made that support content creators more. But I know that Fortnite is, Epic Games is not Nintendo when it comes to this. They're not trying to shut down Evo.
Yeah.
They're not literally the best publicity that they're going to get that year. They're not trying to shut it down. They're not trying to put very, very heavy copyright claims on videos that people are putting out there and using that. So, I mean, my best answer is that Nintendo should be at the bottom of this list. Epic Games, I'm going to cautiously give my nod of approval to.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer. There's it's ingrained in our culture now. Like, Orange
the kids
Justice
growing
videos
up, they're going to be flossing in their nursing homes.
Yeah, for sure.
So it was a shame that I couldn't use Dota twice, because this was one I wanted to really use Dota on.
I know you're really passionate about like the international documentaries and things like that.
Things like they encourage people to make short films for their games, which are submitted every international and
Nice.
Displayed at the international. Things like just the tools that you have within the game to create content for it, such as guides and whatnot. Like things like op.gg exist inside of Dota. Like that those statistics, those things are inside of Dota. So even educational content is just built into it. But I decided to take a look into my past, a look into my history, my roots, and I came out swinging with Team Fortress 2.
Interesting.
A little bit of Gary's mod.
Little bit, yeah. But so reason being, TF2 is not only able to provide the tool, like in the form of when I say TF2, it's kind of branching over to Valve in general.
Yeah.
Saying things like Source Filmmaker, where they provide you models and a whole filmmaking, studio to work with. Aside from that, the canvas that it is to create content is absolutely ridiculous. Like you go back and you watch old TF2 meme videos or just like, funny TF2 video, you Google that and you're going to find so much. There are so many content creators that got a good start in TF2. You have the competitive scene, which was actually really fun to watch and had great commentators. You look at things like, again, they do something very similar to Dota, where they had every year, they had I forgot what it was called, but it was, you would submit your film about TF2, and whenever you won, you actually got an in-game item, an exclusive in-game item. And it's just like that level of like, you create good content, here's an in-game item that nobody else has. Like, that's cool. That's interesting.
Absolutely.
Like, that alone is something that I feel like just facilitates that. I would argue that TF2 is one of the games that created this idea of content creation for video games. And not just learning how to play the game or like just knowing what the game is, stuff like that kind of content, but content that was entertaining, content that created communities. That's why I feel like TF2 deserves some recognition in this area.
Absolutely. Like, I can talk to some length about problems that I had with that system where, like, I remember going into TF2 and being like, okay, all of these games are just like really bad mods that kids have made and that don't really make any gameplay sense and aren't fun to play. Like, I want to play the regular maps and nobody's playing those.
Yeah.
There were issues like that were introduced, but you have to give a lot of credit to TF2 for being willing to take those risks and seeing, okay, like, this amount of freedom does give us the potential to create some very cool things. And I think Valve learned later to curate those a little bit more so that you have ways of finding the good ones, and it's less cluttered by the junk. But that was kind of where it all started. And Source Filmmaker, you have to hand it to... There's still not another tool like Source Filmmaker. I don't... To my knowledge, there is no other better way to make video game movies out of assets that are in video games than using Source Filmmaker. It was just... It's so ahead of its time, and it still is somehow. How has nobody else tried to do that? I remember Gary's mod and, the absolute sandbox that was, even though most people just used it to go, haha, ragdoll physics funny. It was a tool that they put out there that had very, very high potential for uses for filmmaking, for creating. So a huge nod to Valve with regard to facilitating that. I do think that you're right that they have a big legacy in terms of the concept of video game content creation.
Yeah, those are really good answers. They're better than mine. But I'm not going to change mine because as of now, we have not agreed on a single thing here. And I think that's kind of beautiful.
I think it's beautiful, and I think we should keep it that way.
Yeah. So, I think what I would like to do is, like, take this to our Discord and, like, vote. And see who wins for next time.
That would be a lot of fun, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm really curious to see, and we'll put that on Twitter. We'll put that every place we can think to put it that has a poll feature.
Yeah, for sure. But this was an interesting exercise. So I guess let's review our games here. So I had the team size of Smash Ultimate, which is primarily 1v1. That's the main format. But you can play doubles, you can do crew battles, that sort of stuff. Core gameplay of Melee, the aesthetic of Overwatch, the availability of Fortnite. It's on everything. You can always play it on anything. Let me switch the scenes here so you guys can see. Community organization of Street Fighter with the Capcom Pro Tour. The rollback and netcode of them's fighting herds. Rocket League sort of in-game training, customizability factor. The content creation of Call of Duty, and my legend, Mango. All right. So that's my list. I'm sticking to it.
Then mine, I have for team size 4v4, so I used Halo as an example, so I could use Splatoon later. I've got Rocket League's core gameplay, because soccer is the world's game, and Rocket League is the world's video game. The aesthetic of Splatoon, and if you have not listened to the soundtrack, what are you doing? Go find it on YouTube. It's all there, and it's all very, very cool. I especially recommend the Chirpy Chips. Availability. By the way, something I didn't mention: Splatoon invented in-universe bands, and they are part of the lore.
Oh yeah.
So each different music style you hear, like there are band members that are different cephalopods, cuttlefish and sea urchins and all of this stuff and one of them's a kazoo player because they had a kazoo part in one of those songs, and so they just built that into the. So anyway, it's so much world building that is really beautiful to see, and it gives so many musicians a chance to participate with them. Anyway, availability, I put League of Legends because everything should be on the PC and it's free and it's just one download that's easy to find. Community organization, I put Melee because I am very disgruntled and disillusioned about the effects that a company owning an esport has. I think that the biggest barrier by far to any esport growing is a company owning it, and undoing that as much as possible, if by mismanagement, as in Melee's case, is what's in the end best for the community. Netcode, I put Mortal Kombat 11 as a nod to their very significant efforts to include the good netcode that they did have, despite it taking so much longer to get the game out. In-game customizability and design, I gave to Dota because that is a game where you need to map every single button to something. Your entire left hand is going to be all over the keyboard, and being able to put those where you want is important. It has a very good spectator mode, and every single game that is out there should make significant improvements to their spectator mode. If they ever make a new iteration, they should patch it in. It's just better for the esport. It makes it so much easier for people to spectate, and that should be a no-brainer to anybody who wants their game to be an esport. What was the other one for customizability and design? There was one other aspect of that. Oh, modding. I think if you're not supporting mods, then I don't like your game. Melee, at least you're able to mod it and they're not shutting it down with copyright. That's close enough for me. But what they did to Project M is unforgivable. Dota is not doing what they did to Project M to people, and thank God. And finally, content creation. Fortnite is a game that is built to be created content around. So I think that is something that should be considered. Now, it has this kind of jaded pop aesthetic to it sometimes, where it sometimes feels like we're just doing this because it'll be popular, not because we think that it makes any sense. And that almost swayed me away from it. But the other piece of it that pushed me in that direction was that there is a partner program with Epic Games where they're rewarding content creators. And, the game made $3 billion in 1 year. They can give a little bit of that back. So shout outs to them. And my legend was Armada because his run at Genesis 1 was one of the most epic storylines I've ever seen in my life. And he's not a larger-than-life personality. He's a real person who can talk you logically through every step of his mental process. And he goes, you can do this too if you do X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. And I think demystifying, not making a saint out of someone, Hagio, there's a word for that, making someone a saint, like what we've done to the founding fathers, what you do to the Catholic saints, hagiography, I think is the word for it. He needs no hagiography. He's a great person without all of that, and I think that's amazing about him.
All right, running down my list, we got Valorant 5v5. I think bigger teams offer more variety of gameplay and also more complexity and depth. Going to core gameplay. Oh, I used Valorant for that, by the way. I don't know if I said that. Core gameplay, We're going to StarCraft, back to the RTS era, back to the birth of esports. I really wish that we had more competitive RTS that were big, I think, again, if we brought back StarCraft today and it was at its peak, it would stay there for a long time. Aesthetic, we're going to Dota, the rugged and yet silly at the same time look. Availability, I'm going for CSGO. The lower price point makes it it makes it easier to get into. It makes it a bit easier to fund, I think, as well, especially initially. Aside from that, I think it deters people from smurfing, from ban evading, stuff like that. That was availability. Community organization, I'm going for Tekken with the World Tour. Again, being very light on restrictions for local tournaments. and whatnot. Netcode, I'm going for Warcraft 3, or really any good peer-to-peer dedicated server hybrid kind of deal. For in-game customizability and design, I'm going for World of Warcraft. Being able to move your UI, change all your key bindings, set up macros, I think is going to be super important for a game that would be what I have in mind. Content creation, going back to the genesis with TF2, going back to the classics, the software that they have, as well as just the way that they provide content in game. I think it's just good, pure fun. And then going to the legend category, I did go for the sainthood. I went for Harada. I also went for Ice Frog. I think Ice Frog steps a little bit away from that kind of sainthood thing. People love him, but he decides to remain anonymous. And I think that there's something interesting about that. So, yeah.
This is a terrible time for me to remember this because we are like an hour and a half past the part of the conversation where this would have been relevant. But I want to give an honorable mention in core gameplay to Quake because I think that's the closest I've ever seen to melee in a shooter. There were so many, and I also want to like talk about something, Half-Life, bunny hopping, stuff like that made its way into CS and all of that stuff. Like all of those movement mechanics, just you don't see them in shooters anymore, and I don't understand why not. I think that if we were to get a modern shooter that was like Quake, where it had things like bunny hopping, rocket jumping, the ability to move around the map faster than the game developers intended initially with those games, I think that would have a really strong argument for my core gameplay spot, even though Rocket League is the world's game.
That's something that's really cool about Splatoon as well, is that it's not just walk and shoot, man. It's swim also.
Yeah, there are some mechanics built into that that are, added movement mechanics, and that is really cool. I don't think it holds a candle to Quake, to be honest.
Sure.
Okay.
All right. Well, we've exhausted every possible avenue here and run way over time, so we're gonna leave this up to you, the folks at home, to decide what your ultimate supreme esports game is. Be sure to check the Discord and the Twitter and the Facebook and whatever. And we will be back next week with some other topic. Thank you to Simon for joining us. Simon, your perspective on this was very welcome, very different from I think mine in particular. So that's much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a good time. Right on.
So, signing off.
Go into the Discord, go into the Twitter, go vote. Do your civic duty.
See you next time.
Peace out, guys.